You are listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast with Maggie Green, episode number 270.
Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast, a podcast that celebrates cookbook readers, buyers, collectors, writers, and clubs. And now your host, cookbook author, culinary dietitian, and cookbook writing coach, Maggie Green.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. How's everybody doing today? Very excited to be here with you for another episode of the podcast, bringing to you a conversation with some wonderful cookbook writers. Although the book I'm going to talk about today isn't a cookbook, it falls into the food, beverage space, which actually broadens this whole topic out. So pay attention today with the end when we talk about favorite cookbooks. There are three really good references and books for you to consider discovering also for adding to your collection of books related to beverages and cocktails. And the reason we're talking about cocktails is because today on the show, I'm excited to have an interview with John McCarthy and Carey Jones. John is a mixologist by trade, and Carey, a food and spirits writer. They have been crafting cocktails together for many years. They're the co-authors of The Liquor Cabinet Roulette, a series that appeared on Food and Wine's website for 7 years. They're also the authors of Be Your Own Bartender and their newly released book, Every Cocktail Has a Twist. In this book that we talk about today, you will learn all about tools, tips, tricks, and recipes to reconfigure 25 timeless cocktails, from Bloody Marys, daiquiris, and Manhattans to margaritas, Negronis, and Old Fashions. Whether you're a new enthusiast or a seasoned expert, these original recipes will transform your go-to drinks. And today on the show, John and Carey and I talk about how writing their weekly column for Food and Wine provided the practice and recipe foundation for their books. We have a discussion about cocktails and how to approach the topic as a home bartender, tips and tricks for making drinks such as blender eggnog, no muddle mint juleps, which as a native Kentuckian had a lot of fun talking to them about, and pitcher Pimm's, as well as some excellent tips for party-sized quantities of cocktails, including a Cranhattan, which I think I'm going to have to make for hosting my family on Thanksgiving. We're going to finish with their tips for aspiring writers and authors, as well as a conversation about their favorite beverage books. Before we dive into the show, though, I want to say that sometimes I hear and read traditional publishers getting a bad rap in writing circles and groups that I belong to online. I sometimes hear traditional publishers described as profit-seeking enemies who are out to steal our ideas and worse yet, steal our souls. Yes, I've actually have people tell me that, or they have mentioned that in a post that they make. But I have to tell you that I loved all of my publishers. They were truly partners in helping me create beautiful cookbooks so that I could share recipes and stories with a broader audience. The team of editors, designers, layout experts, illustrators, printers, photographers, indexers, marketers, and distributors that they paid to help get my book out into the world were all amazing too. With traditional publishing, we, as the cookbook writers, provide the recipes and stories, and the publishers work the book magic. We get to become cookbook concept machines, writing and cranking out book concepts and manuscripts, doing the part that we love, which is the cooking and the writing, and our publishers create the books. So if you want to learn more about publishing in this way, where you get published without spending any of your own money to edit, design, print, or distribute the book, head on over to www.cookbookwritersacademy.com/free to learn more about the traditional publishing process for cookbook writers. So let's dive into this fun interview with John and Carey as we learn all about their new book, Every Cocktail Has a Twist. Hi, Carey and John. Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast.
Hi there. Thanks for having us.
Hello.
Hello. So excited that you're here talking about your beautiful new book. But before we dive into all the things we're going to talk about, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Great, thanks. So my name is Carey Jones, and I'm a career food, spirits, and travel writer. I've been in this industry for about 15 years.
And I am John McCarthy, and I've been working in bars and running bar programs and working with brands since the early aughts.
Yeah.
And we started collaborating on writing back in about 2013. And have just had a really great time kind of combining John's professional perspective with my, I'd say, more amateur perspective and writing chops. So we've been working together ever since, and we're a couple.
Yeah, and we're married, and we have a child.
Very good. Well, it's great to have you all here. Excited to talk about your book, Every Cocktail Has a Twist. And what I like to start with, if we can, is giving everybody kind of a 10,000-foot view of this book. And maybe within the context of the work that you've done with books, because this is your second cocktail book, but what this book will do for someone, what it'll help them with, and what you're hoping to achieve by writing the book.
Great, thank you. So so Every Cocktail Has a Twist is focused around 25 classic cocktails, and some of these are classics in the sense that a historical reference book would recognize as classics, such as the Manhattan, the martini, things like that. Some of them are just popular drinks that people know and love. So if you think about a Bloody Mary or an eggnog, just kind of drinks that are really out there in popular parlance that people are interested in.
An espresso martini.
Yeah.
Drinks that you've heard people call out for at a bar or restaurant, or you've seen it on a tray passing by your table and said, "What's that one?"
Yeah. And so each one of these chapters is focused around one of those drinks. You get a bit of history, you get recommended spirits, techniques for making a great one. And then, which we think is the really fun part of the book, is there are 5 to 10 original variations on each one. So that's really the bulk of the book. And it's fun in a sense that most people know what their favorite drink is or what their favorite drink for a given occasion is. You know, you can have more than one. We have more than one. But if you like an old fashioned, you should be able to flip to the old fashioned chapter, hopefully learn a little something about your favorite, but then also find a whole lot of drinks in a similar vein that you like and can make.
Yeah. And all of these are geared obviously toward people who are doing classic drinks at home. But John, your experience with teaching people probably in the industry also who serve in bars, what is it that drives like these popular drinks that people call out, and why does it change from, I don't know, how often does it change?
Often does it change? Well, the one thing we remind ourselves is most drinks are all a variation off of a template. There's only so many there's only so many drinks out there that you could make. And I think one of the things that happens is when a new product or a new ingredient or a new spirit gets quote unquote discovered, and everybody just gets super excited about it. And all of a sudden you see it on every menu. I mean, you'll see it in restaurants too. I mean, I remember, Fiddlehead Fern season, like every restaurant in New York City would have Fiddlehead Ferns on the menu for 2 weeks. And it would just kind of take over in the zeitgeist, and everybody would be making something with, way back when Saint Germain elderflower liqueur came out, and it was just changed everybody, it blew everybody's mind, and it was in all the drinks.
Yeah. I don't know if it's my imagination or not. I took a trip in 2018 to Salzburg, and we went to Prague, and Aperol spritzes were like everywhere. And I come home, and it's like, I start to go out. It's like everybody's drinking Aperol spritzes. So I don't know if that was the case or if I just wasn't aware of it then.
It happened.
Yeah.
There was, I think that was marketing.
Yeah. I think that the last decade or so, the Aperol spritz has just exploded. Some of that is marketing.
Somebody spent a lot of money for us all to go, hey, what's that?
Yeah. And I think that I went to the store then to get a bottle of Aperol, and guess what? They didn't have any because it was all sold out. So I think you're right. It probably was a marketing job. Espresso martinis have been fascinating to watch too. And I think you have the twist in your book, but even just the different ways that people think the original one is supposed to be made is kind of funny and been fascinating to watch also. So I think it's neat. Classic cocktails, the old fashioned, Manhattan, martini, Negroni. I know you had a Negroni in there. And then the ones that you see people getting when you're out and about. So very fun. And I can't wait to try some of them. We happen to, as you know, live in Kentucky. We like to think we're the bourbon capital of the world. I really don't know if that's true or not, but lots of bourbon in Kentucky. And
Should be.
and I think that an old fashioned is a great way to feature and just simply make a cocktail out of some good bourbon. If it's really good, you can just sip it on the rocks, but old fashions are a great drink for something like that.
Absolutely.
Yep. Well, let's talk a little bit about just the concept of a book about cocktails and the whole thought about drinking. And I know one of the things that you all believe, and I'd love to talk about this, is there's really no wrong way to drink. And why don't you tell me a little bit about what that means to you within the context of the work you do and the books that you're writing?
Absolutely. I think that I would say in the last 15 years or so, just the concept of mixology has really exploded. And I think, especially at the beginning, people were not really used to bars taking cocktails that seriously. You know, the 90s and early aughts were a time of, bright green liqueurs and all kinds of whipped cream and just things that you would not call sophisticated. And so when bartenders really started putting what I would call culinary thought into cocktails, they could be very serious about it. And that's awesome. That moves the industry forward. But I do think that high-end bartending got a bit of a stuffy reputation. I mean, I'm sure you can imagine
we all started
the guy
to
in
take
mustache.
we all started to take ourselves very seriously.
Yeah.
And I think that a decent number of cocktail books can kind of reflect that and have, I don't want to say a sense of snobbery, but a sense of inaccessibility. If you don't know the right spirits, have the right expensive equipment, know all the lingo, you're not really one of us. And that's just an attitude we really don't like. We think that bartending can be for everyone. Technically speaking, it's certainly not more complicated than baking or many other forms of cooking. And drinking should be fun. Like if you don't have fun,
that's the point.
If you don't have fun making and drinking a cocktail, why are you doing it? You don't need it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it is true. It is the same for cooking. I mean, there are, a lot of fancy gadgets, a lot of high-end ways to do things. I always think, though, as someone who cooks at home a lot, like home bartending a lot, that if I really want to be entertained by food outside of, the simple things that we do here in our house, I'll step up recipes and try something new, or I will go out and try something that I maybe couldn't make at home. Or perhaps it's a good way to maybe try a spirit that I wouldn't necessarily have in stock at home. I could drink it at a restaurant, give it a try. So home bartending, though, really does, with your book in particular, give you access to over, like you said, 200 different variations on drinks that everyone knows the name of, but you can take and twist in a lot of different ways.
That's exactly it. That the fundamentals of making, whether it's an old fashioned or a margarita, things like that, are pretty basic. They're important. You can't make a good old fashioned without stirring long enough and getting that ice melt. You can't make a good margarita without fresh juice. But once you get those, you can really make a great drink. And I think the gulf between what people are used to making at home and what they can, with just really a few improvements in technique, is pretty huge. Yeah. So, as you said, if you want the whiz bang smoking, the cocktail that appears in a puff of smoke with a canapé on the side and all that, that's what we go to bars for. And they're fun and they're amazing.
And they have the infrastructure to produce that for you over and over and over.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. Well, you mentioned a few things about things that maybe elevate your drinks that you can do at home. We love tips and tricks and hearing from you with your experience about the shortcuts that are really going to elevate people's drinks without any compromise in the way they taste. So I wonder if you would share some of those with us today. and tell us what they are, and like a inside perspective on what really is going to make a difference in the way we mix our drinks at home.
Well, we are all about taking shortcuts when they don't have a detrimental effect on the overall quality of the drink, but we're not going to have you do a bunch of fancy technique just for the sake of it. And so I think one really great example is we have a whole chapter on eggnog. And we have 2 different ways to make it, both of which are really exceptional, and one of which is a lot easier.
Just to make the eggnog base before we've added any modifiers, any spirit to it. Just that, you have the classic way to make eggnog where you're separating the yolks and the whites, and you're whipping them separately and then folding them together. And that makes it really light and fluffy and fresh. And you want to drink it right away. But also what is fantastic is put all the ingredients at once in the blender and turn it on and get it all mixed, ready to go. And then add your booze and you're set and you're ready. And it's fantastic. And one of the things that you can do with eggnog as well, because alcohol is a preservative, is you can age your eggnog, which sounds crazy. Keep it refrigerated, but the alcohol keeps the eggs safe and the cream safe. And we've had 6-month-old eggnog that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And I think that the real key here is that you can only do that with alcoholic eggnog.
Yeah.
Eggnog that has a decent dose of alcohol in it. Do not try it
without alcohol
alcohol, or you will get
alcohol-free eggnog is not going to age.
Yeah.
But especially when we're doing it for parties and events, we always use the blender for the eggnog, and it comes out fantastic.
And I probably, when you think about the frothiness that the egg whites would add if you separated them and whipped the egg whites and added them, and the blender just does that on its own.
Blender does it for you.
Yeah.
Blender does it for you.
Yeah. And you mix the alcohol, you said, in after that, or you can put it in at the same time. It really doesn't matter.
You can put it in at the same time.
Yeah.
We have recipes. We have like our eggnog base recipe, and then once you have the eggnog base, add the booze in. But when you're making it, if you're doing it one base for one drink, you can just put it all in together.
That sounds great. And I do, ironically enough, have a tradition every year of making a batch of eggnog. I usually make it the Saturday after Thanksgiving, and I've got this big quart glass jar, and I do take the time to pour boiling water in the jar, I wash it just to make sure it's very clean and it's been sanitized from a heat perspective. Then I let it cool off and put the base in, and then I save it, the aged eggnog base, until closer to Christmas. Of course, we'll taste it along the way, but you're right about that. It ages well. If you want to age it, I think it does mellow the flavor a little bit, but I love that idea of using a blender to get the frothiness, and that it can be ready now. I mean, if you want some tonight, you can blend your eggnog up. And I think eggs, some people are afraid of the raw egg and putting a raw egg in it and drinking a raw egg, but that's really what eggnog is, short of cooking it. I didn't look at all the variations of your eggnog, but do you have a cooked variation also?
No.
Yeah, that's right. I would agree.
And our go-to about using eggs in drinks is, if you crack open the egg and it smells weird, don't use it.
Right.
I mean,
right.
If it smells if it smells fine, looks fine, it's fine.
Because eggnog's not the only drink that uses a raw egg. A lot of other drinks do also. So
yeah, a lot of egg white drinks.
Yeah. Great. So what other tips? I can't wait to try the eggnog. What else should we do?
Well, one that will be particularly relevant to you in bourbon country, and you do live in bourbon country, is we have a great shortcut for mint juleps. We love a great mint julep, and it's really essential that you do get fresh mint in there. But what we found is that they can be a pain to make for a crowd because you're muddling each individual one. And, we have ways to set that up assembly line style, but they're still pretty labor intensive. But what we did is we developed a mint syrup. We have 2 ways to make it. One's with fresh mint. One's actually with peppermint tea bags. And you combine that with the bourbon. Then you do the crushed ice. But the key is you still have that huge fresh mint garnish.
Yeah.
So once you kind of stick your nose in the drink and you get that experience of the fresh mint, if you then get the mint flavor through the syrup, you can't really tell the difference that wasn't fresh muddled.
Yeah.
But if you didn't have the garnish, you could absolutely tell.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
things like that, where we kind of tease apart what makes this drink work, and we still have the aromatics that really give you that impression of fresh mint, but we kind of bring out the flavors through another more accessible way.
And it makes a huge difference if you're having a party, if you can use the mint syrup and then just be garnishing. And we call it activating. So you have your sprig of mint, and we always say as well, it's not the Charlie Brown Christmas tree sprig of mint. It's a bouquet of mint. And you lightly tap it against your hand, and that activates the oils so that it's really fragrant. So that when you stick your nose, it's a big bouquet of mint. So when you go to sip on it, your nose is in that mint, and it makes all the difference.
Yeah. And being from Kentucky, we have 4 distinct seasons. And in the springtime, when the Derby is the first Saturday in May, fresh mint is coming on pretty good. There is nothing like it. And I happen to grow up in central Kentucky, where the limestone water, they had it all. I mean, my parents were purists when it came to their mint juleps. But I have to tell you, the idea of the tea bag and using that to steep some of that flavor into the syrup is a great idea. It really is.
That is definitely a life hack, right? That's a life hack.
Yeah, it's a great idea, because then you have the syrup. And I think for a party, this is something that we want to talk a little bit about, because a lot of times I think the best cocktails, obviously, are shared with other people. We have a rule in our house, and I don't know if it's because we grew up around bourbon drinkers, grew up in Kentucky, but we don't, when we have a cocktail, we have to sit and talk. And it's, yeah, I mean, I cook almost every night. I could cook with a cocktail and, be standing up having margarita and some chips and salsa, whatever. But I think the best cocktails are served with other people, and you're enjoying like sitting and talking to them. And I used to work for Joy Cooking. Irma Rombauer said that cocktails were social lubricants. And
Absolutely.
so that's the greatest kind. But my parents were always, very, very funny about that, and making sure that, I guess, that we knew that. I can't say that my mom always abided by that rule, but that's the rule I've made for myself as I've moved through life and had children who are, watching what I do and paying attention to what I do. And I said, well, if I'm going to teach them how to cook and teach them how to eat, I'm also going to teach them how to drink. And that's my thing. But the mint juleps were a seasonal thing. We only usually had them once a year, though. I'm curious, in the restaurant industry or in the bartender industry, if people order them out of season.
Rarely, but
Yeah.
yes, it's same with ordering a mojito in January happens, but people tend to drink them in the summertime.
Yeah.
So juleps are usually, and they hit everybody's menu in the springtime, and so that's when they're on display.
Yeah. And if you're making a quantity of them to make the syrup, and you have a lot of other tips for other drinks that you can make a larger quantity at one time. I know you had that for the Manhattan. You had it for the mint julep, obviously. Tell us about your concept behind making a larger quantity of cocktails and how people can do that at home also. When they're having more than, well, I don't know if they're having a crowd of people over. It's easier than mixing them one by one.
Mm-hmm.
I think that something we tried to put a lot of thought into in this book is which drinks are easier to batch. So in bartender parlance, batch essentially just means making ahead of time, combining all the ingredients, or in some cases, it's all the ingredients except club soda, for example, and having it ready to go. And there are going to be differences between that and if you shake each drink to order. And so our thought is, how do we account for those differences in developing a batch recipe?
So one of the things we do is you have to take into account that when you stir a drink properly and when you shake a drink, that ice is doing more than just making the drink cold. The ice is melting, and so you have that dilution, that ice melt. And on average, you get stirring and shaking per drink about an ounce of water added to the drink. So if you batch everything and don't add the water, the drink isn't going to taste right. When we're doing a drink that has, like let's say we, batched a bunch of margaritas, like the quick trick is if it's in a quart container that's in the fridge, you can literally just shake that. Take it out of the fridge, shake it, and pour it out. But you need to have added the water, because just pouring it over ice, it's not that ounce of water isn't just going to magically happen once you pour it over the ice. And the water opens up all the flavors, mellows the flavors, allows the nuance to happen. If you've ever been to a bar and you've gotten a drink that's served over the big rock, the one large ice cube, and you go to taste it and it just seems too overpowering, very tight. My suggestion would be, well, they didn't stir it long enough, because they're thinking that big ice cube is going to give you the ice melt, and that's going to take a half an hour. Mm-hmm. But if you stir it properly, get the proper ice melt, then pour it over the big ice, then you're going to have a more enjoyable experience.
I had a funny experience with that. We went to a friend's house and they made old fashions with rye, and I don't know if they used like 100 proof rye, and they were all into their big ice and they poured it over and it was just, you're exactly right. It was too overpowering. Yeah.
I think that in drinks like the, just as you said, a Manhattan or an old fashioned martini, one of those drinks that is, frankly, mostly just booze, that's where you really get the impact. And as John said, you can taste it at a bar if it's not stirred long enough. And if you tried to do that recipe without water, you'll kind of get hit in the face with alcohol, which even in a boozy drink like a martini, that's not the point. Yeah. So when we develop those recipes, it's really important to have that water in there.
Yeah. Yeah. So don't skip it thinking that you're trying to just make it go further. It really does affect the flavor and people's experience of the cocktail. I think when you take the first sip of a cocktail, if it's just like, straight fire, it's like, okay, unless it's meant to be that way, something's usually wrong. Usually
unless it's on fire.
Well, that's true too. If it's on fire, it should be straight fire. But otherwise, I think that it's like, it should be pleasant. And you can like smell things, you can taste things, and not just like, otherwise just take a shot is what I say. Skip the cocktail and just have the shot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a couple of other pitcher drinks that you have also. Pitcher Pimm's is one of them. I'd love to talk about that. I always think of Pimm's Cup and polo matches. So what do I need to know about Pimm's?
Well, for Pimm's, for us, it's a garden party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like a mint julep, it's almost just as closely tied to an occasion. Definitely a summer drink, definitely a drink to share with friends, which is why it can be frustrating that the way a lot of people make Pimm's cups, which is with so many delicious muddled ingredients like strawberry and cucumber, that can be an absolute pain to make for a crowd, even more so than a mint julep. So we devised a way to pull out the blender. It's a wonderful tool. And blend a lot of the ingredients together ahead of time, and not with ice. This isn't a frozen drink, but have the blender do a lot of work for you, chopping up. I think we definitely have strawberries in there, cucumber, ginger, a little bit of mint, and then we strain that so that you don't have kind of a smoothie or fresh juice consistency, but something
you have all that
thinner
flavor imparted.
And we played around a lot with how to do a large format Pimm's recipe. And that was just the runaway winner.
Yeah.
Nice. Great. And that's the beauty of buying a cookbook that is developed and tested and run through all this, is that we get to benefit from your testing and experimentation and reap the rewards. So that sounds like a great drink for spring. Makes me think about Thanksgiving, though. It's coming up here in the States. If someone is hosting several people for Thanksgiving, would you recommend a cocktail when they get there? Or do you think that is not good for the dinner? What are your thoughts on that? And if you do think it's a great idea, which I'm kind of guessing you might. What would you recommend, or if there's a party version of it in your book that we can make?
Well, we would. We're quite biased.
I had a feeling you might say that.
Just what you said about a cocktail being a social lubricant. I think that's probably
Exactly.
never truer than a
Thanksgiving.
holiday gathering.
Yes.
There's a drink we love, and I think really just kind of shows what this book is about. It's called the Cranhattan, and it's what it sounds like. It's a cranberry Manhattan. I wouldn't recommend having multiple before dinner. It's a pretty stiff drink, but one will kind of get you in the mood for a big turkey meal. It follows a pretty traditional Manhattan template. It's got a great rye in there, sweet vermouth, and then 100% cranberry juice, which is an ingredient we love using. It's not a cranberry juice cocktail. It's not ocean spray. The only ingredient on the list should be cranberry. And if you taste it, it's almost too tart to drink.
Yeah,
it really is too tart to drink.
It's very tart. It's very dry. And yeah, the key is that it's 100% cranberry juice. There's no pear juice or anything, because the point of it is that dry tartness, using that as one of the effects that comes to the cocktail, that when you have the dry tartness of 100% cranberry juice with rye, and that spiciness of the rye, they just work really well together.
Yeah.
And it's a festive drink. Like, you can't taste cranberry without thinking of the holidays.
It tastes like the holidays.
Yeah, great. I'm gonna have to give it a try. I happen to be hosting this year, so. And when I didn't read the recipe for that, when you make a pitcher or party size version of these drinks, do you recommend an 86 proof or 100 proof? What do you usually like people to use?
Depending on the drink, because you're going to get when you're using 100 proof rye, the spiciness just comes through so much stronger than when you're at 86%.
Yeah.
And for this drink in particular, we do recommend 100% rye. I think when you're serving guests, and we have a funny story about this, the most important thing for cocktails is portion control, because a classic cocktail, especially something like a Manhattan,
should be served in a pint glass.
Yeah, not be served in a pint glass.
Served in a pint glass.
We had a holiday party. This was probably 6-7 years ago, at my mom's house, and had a punch bowl full of a cocktail we loved, and certainly left a note saying, 1 ladle full over ice. A lot of people served it up like it was just lemonade at a barbecue, and several people were not able to drive home, and it was
I think about. And that's whenever we do this, because I love to do it, but my husband's always like, I mean, he's like a hound dog, like around the area where we serve it, because he's very concerned. He doesn't want that to happen to anybody, first of all. Now, then he doesn't want anybody leaving our house that way. So my family always laughs at him, the way he is. But it's true. It's a sipper. I say, if you're going to have some, sit down and talk to people. And but I do think the Cranhattan sounds really good. I'm going to have to give it a try and see how that goes for the party, and make sure that, if you only make a limited amount, though, assuming one person doesn't drink the majority of it, if you don't refill the bowl, then that's it. It's gone. Yeah. So that sounds like a good thing to do. So what about your journey to this book? I know that this is the second book that you wrote, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your first book too, and a little bit about how one book often leads to another book, and what happened in the midst of all of this, and what life is like as someone who's working on books, developing concepts for books, and then of course all the content that goes into the book.
Absolutely. Well, we've been collaborating together since 2013. That's 10 years now. I didn't quite realize that. But we started with a column together for Food and Wine Magazine's website that was called Liquor Cabinet Roulette. And the idea is that it focused on a different ingredient every week. And it was very much for the home bartender. And it would show you 3 different ways to use that ingredient. And this is at a time when, things like Saint Germain, the elderflower liqueur, Campari were still, they weren't new, but the average drinker might not have much familiarity with them, or they might have seen them, but not known what to do with them. And so our thought was, it's great for people to know, hey, a little bit of Saint Germain and Prosecco, that's a really popular brunch drink. And they would get more complicated from there. But it was all about making ingredients accessible for the home bartender.
Something that you'd seen at the bar or your friend had, and you didn't really know much about it. Then we would, take that ingredient, that product, and explain to you what it is, and then take you through like a easy, intermediate, advanced 1, 2, 3 cocktail. And advanced would be using an egg, muddling, nothing, there's no centrifugal equipment or anything involved. And easy might just be turning it into a highball, to just kind of like open up that this is something, it's not scary, it's accessible. 1, 2, 3, here's how you can use it now that you have that bottle at home.
Yeah.
And we did that column weekly for 7 years. So over time, we just developed
a lot of drinks.
It's a lot of drinks.
Yeah.
Developed a pretty massive recipe archive, and still always had friends, family coming to us asking for drink recommendations. And I think that's when the idea of a book kind of started to germinate, to just put together the things we feel like we want people to know.
Yeah, people were asking us a lot what to do for parties, especially, and it was like, oh, you know what? We could probably do that.
Yeah.
And so Be Your Own Bartender, that came out in 2018. We call it the world's first flowchart cocktail book. And this book was all about kind of getting people to a drink that they loved, for whether for a specific occasion, to their specific taste. I think sometimes if you look at any kind of cookbook, but cocktail books specifically, you can flip through beautiful pictures, you can read great descriptions, and you kind of think, I don't know, where do I start? What do I want?
Yeah.
And so we feel like the flowcharts were kind of we think flowcharts are fun because we're nerds.
Yeah. Flowcharts are fun.
A lot of people think flowcharts are fun. They do. I love that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of times people, when they cook, if they're really into the, kind of the nerdy side of it, it's like, it totally works. So I bet you sold books just based on that alone.
When we would have fun with how the flow chart would work as well, like the questions. But the questions I found, they would be very important. Like in the whiskey chapter, going through the flow chart and getting to the question of, are you sitting alone by the fire or are you sitting with someone else? Those are two different drinks, because those are two different experiences.
Yeah.
So some of it was practical, but a lot of it's fun, which, again, we think drinking should be
accessible and fun. And, we try to keep things from being intimidating when you look at, I know that my experience with cocktail books, cookbooks, sometimes if I look at it, it's the textbook quality of it can be a little intimidating, of trying to figure out what I want to do. That's so we've always tried to make things very open and accessible.
Yeah.
And I think that the second book we worked on together, Every Cocktail Has a Twist, part of the accessibility is in starting with those drinks that most people know. Even if you're not a frequent bar goer, you have some idea of what a Manhattan is. You have some idea of what a margarita is.
You've heard somebody order a sangria at some point. You might not actually know what it is, but you've heard of it before. So what is that? What is that sangria?
And so having those kind of familiar hooks in the book, we think are just a great way to get people to start reading, start exploring, kind of whatever their skill level.
Yeah. And did you end up having to approach an agent or a publisher, or did they come find you?
We had a previous relationship with our amazing agent, Vicky Bajor, who I've worked with on previous books, and really believed in kind of the combination of us as, storyteller, professional, and just our approach to cocktails. So we worked with Vicky to get our deal with Countryman, who are amazing. They're a W.W. Norton imprint. Our awesome editor, Anne, was just always an advocate for Be Your Own Bartender, and really, I think she actually uses the book a lot, which which helps. And it was an exciting book, a successful one, and they approached us to do a second book. So we were excited to be able to.
That's a nice feeling.
It is a nice
feeling. It's a great feeling. And I think that's what happens though, I think sometimes the traditional publishing industry gets such a bad rap. And I'm pretty open about talking about this because I think that it takes a different mindset, but you're really getting to work with a team of people who want to sell books about what you want to write about. And most of the time, they can put together a pretty good book with your material. And I know they can make my material look a lot better than I could do it on my own. And then help you get it out in the world. And you build that relationship that when it's time for another book, or even if you had another idea for a book, you could have said, hey, I think I got another idea. They probably would have said, great. And I think that this leads to the next thing, which I feel like, well, you all obviously wrote about something that you cared about and you enjoyed. Plus, you had this way through food and wine to actually create content on a regular basis every week. It's amazing what you can do when you have that type of thing going. I was listening to Julia Louis-Dreyfus has a podcast called, she's about 62. She's Elaine on Seinfeld, for no one who knows what I'm talking about. She interviews older women because she wants to get wise from what they have to say. And I was listening to her interview yesterday with Ruth Reichel, and Ruth said the best work she ever did was when she had to do a weekly column because she didn't have time to make it perfect.
Absolutely.
Had to get it out without it being perfect. And if you want to cut your chops in food writing, if anybody's listening, get somewhere. And even if you do it for yourself, do it on Substack. Commit to regularly releasing and writing content that people care about, and that it will teach you a lot about writing quicker than you could ever learn any other way. So the fact that it flowed into a book for you, it makes perfect sense. You did have all this material from 7 years of doing that. And those are the things that I tell people. But what else would you tell someone who really wants to do food writing or travel writing, beverage writing, book writing? What would you say to them?
Well, I think what you just said, Maggie, is an excellent point. I think that there's no way to write other than writing. And whether the pressure is self-generated or deadline generated, just that raw output is important, whether or not it ever sees the light of day. The way we're able to come up with, 100, 200 recipes we truly love is to work through hundreds of others. And I think that the way we were able to sustain that over such a long period of time is our passion for it. We genuinely enjoy making straightforward cocktails that people like drinking. And that's our passion more than, kind of the further edges of technique or, cocktails with gimmicks. There are a lot of ways to drink, and, all of them are valid. But I think our passion for simple drinks people can make at home has really extended through this whole process. And that's what keeps us going and keeps us, we still have fun inventing a riff on a daiquiri, and we've been doing it together for 10 years. You've been doing it for more like 20. And it's still exciting.
Yeah. And when new products come out and we do discover them, like when an aloe liqueur came out, it was like, wait, what? Aloe.
So good.
And it's so good. And to take that and experiment with it and start finding what the possibilities are pretty exciting.
Yeah. I think one thing that impressed me about your book too is you knew who your audience for your book was. You knew that you were writing this for home bartenders, and you weren't targeting, mixologists and, cutting edge bartenders. Although, like you said, they probably could find drinks that they could get excited about in this book. But what was it like to know that the home bartender was the person you were targeting? Sounds like maybe for food and wine, you'd been doing that all along, though.
We have, and we had a joke for our first book that we actually had 3 specific people in mind that every drink should work for one of them.
Yeah.
One of them was John's older brother, Neil.
And he's the guy that will buy every esoteric product possible, even if it's just a quarter ounce of it.
And then really want to impress his friends.
And really want to impress his friends.
Yeah.
And
Neil, if you're listening, love you, buddy.
So we're on one spectrum. In the middle is our sister-in-law, Katie, who she's a teacher. She doesn't do anything professionally related to cocktails, but she loves them. Doesn't have a ton of extra time, but if she falls in love with an ingredient or a drink, she will buy that bottle. She loves, there's an aperitif quite similar to Aperol called Select that we love.
It's out of Venice.
It's out of Venice, and Katie discovered Aperitivo Select. She's their biggest fan, and so she won't always do the most complicated cocktails to show off. No offense, Neil.
No offense,
but she will do one. And the third person was my
mom. I want you to tell me. I think I've seen the Aperitivo Select next to the Aperol at the place where I buy my. I'm going to try it.
Try it. It's really great.
Okay.
And make it just like an Aperol spritz. Just use the Select.
Okay.
And then in Venice they say "Es Selecte."
Yeah, I'll have to give it a try. Okay, and the third person is your mom?
The third person was my mom, who had spent probably most of her adult life mostly drinking Chardonnay and the occasional light beer, and then discovered cocktails probably in the early aughts like everyone else. And now she and her friends love having a watermelon margarita.
Making them for parties. People,
yeah.
And, when they're getting together for, different meetings and making large formats. She really got into it.
So for our first book, it had to be one of those three, somewhere in that spectrum.
And we always make sure that even though, these drinks are for the home bartender and easy and accessible, as a bartender myself, I do put up every one of these drinks to my colleagues, and they all are legit.
They got chops.
There's all the legit and could be served at a cocktail bar.
Totally. Well, and I think just the fact that you, if you're teaching people in the book, which you are, to take care of some of the details that matter, that's what makes a drink special anyway. Pay attention to the glassware, the ice, the water, the stirring, everything that's like things that we may not think is important, where we're overly focused on ingredients. The other stuff matters. And I think that it really leads people down a path where they're like, wow, this was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. Ingredients a lot more accessible than I thought it was going to be, and results really good. And that's what makes a book like this so fun to use, and something that people will develop a relationship with. I think that's the beauty of cookbooks, is we cookbooks that we love and use it, we develop a relationship with them, different from any other kind of a book, except maybe the Bible. People are like, I got my cookbook. It's the one I taught I fed my family out of this, or I fed people out of this. I made my drinks out of this, and it's the one I love, and I'll share it with other people, which is the great thing about cookbooks also. Or, and in this context, cookery, beverage books, anything like your book certainly falls into that category.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the things we like about Every Cocktail Has a Twist and the previous book, Be Your Own Bartender, is that the layout of the book has space on the pages to make notes. One of the things that we think about is whenever we've asked you to make something or go get a certain product to make this one drink, we don't want you to have to do that, and that's it. One drink is all you get. So we try to always make sure we have one, if not several, places to go with that ingredient to make another drink. So then once you start, it's like, okay, I've made this, I liked it, let me try it again in this drink. Or I'm in this one chapter and I made this drink in this chapter, I made that drink in this chapter, but I really like this ingredient and that other ingredient. Can I put them together myself? And then you can start. The hope is that you start using it for yourself and you start making your own drinks.
Yeah. And I think that's when people become true home bartenders, is when they can use what you've taught them and make their own riff on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really nice. I do have a question as we're starting to wrap up. Actually, two questions. What do you think about all this stuff about ice and like clear ice, cloudy ice, ice size, nuggets, cubes, tubes? What should we do about the ice? I don't know if you talk about that in the book, but tell us your thoughts.
One thing we truly believe is ice is an ingredient. In virtually every cocktail, I guess except hot toddies and sometimes something like eggnog. ice is going to play a role. And so it does matter. If you make a cocktail with ice that's been sitting around your freezer for 2 years, it'll probably taste like everything else that's been in your freezer
for 2 years.
And in terms of kind of shapes and things like that, kind of the whole ice carving side is something that John can get super into on the professional side. It's not necessarily something we recommend as the first endeavor for a home bartender. But just having kind of consistent sized ice cubes is the most important thing in terms of the quality of the drink.
And it's about the style of drink. So when I want something ice, I just want it to be cold as possible and refreshing as possible. The smaller the ice, the more there's more ice exposed. And so it's going to be colder and melt quicker. Whereas if I want something like a slow sipper that I've stirred properly to get the proper dilution, if I have one big ice cube, there's less total circumference of ice exposed. So it's going to melt slowly. And the purity comes out in the flavor. I mean, because water, like Carey was saying, if it's exposed in your freezer, or if it's, the ice is freezer burned and has all those little tiny crystals on it, and you put that in your drink, that's all going to affect the quality of your drink.
It's kind of a flatness.
Yeah. And if you're shaking a cocktail and you're using little ice, it's going to get way more dilution than if you're using bigger cubes to shake. And then the difference between crushed ice and nugget and pellet ice to cracked cubes all give you a different experience. So, you can really go there with the ice.
Yeah. And I think if you're unsure, I always say if you're going to have a party and you're unsure, just get a small or a bag of 8-pound bag of ice, put it in the freezer, or you can even empty your pre-made ice out, stick some in there. You can scoop it out on your own, put an ice bucket up. But it does, if you're going to have people over, it does pay to get fresh. We call it clean ice at our house, like have an ice that is clean.
Yeah. And we do it like if it's a big party, we'll just go buy the ice get the ice from the store.
Yeah.
And now you can even get, we're seeing it more and more in some grocery stores where they'll have like cocktail ice with the 1.5 inch cubes, or the big ice, or the spheres, or the spears. And it's that when you talk about like spears, you're starting to get into like the look of it, like what, I don't know about spears so much because it's a tall drink. It's supposed to be refreshing, but you're getting less ice melt. So that's more of a style. That's more of a look, I would say, than the ice doing a specific job.
Yeah. One thing that I just have to chime in, our friend Camper English is the foremost ice authority in the cocktail world. And if you don't think there's such a thing as an ice authority, you haven't read his book.
Yeah.
You want to get deep into the minutia of it. He has a book out somewhat recently called The Ice Book.
It's fantastic.
And it's fantastic.
Yeah.
I learned about ice from him.
Okay. I'll link to that in the show notes also, his book, because I think that they kind of do go hand in hand. And if someone is going to get into this or start dabbling in being a home bartender, I do think the ice conversation is important. And I know you touch on it here too, but if anybody wants to geek out on ice, Camper's book sounds great. Yep. One of my older sisters worked for an ice company. She was actually the accountant for the ice company, but they called it tube ice. And so it had like a hole through, it was a cylindrical piece of ice, but it had a hole in the middle of it. And they had all this marketing campaign about their ice and how great their ice was. And it's just so funny, like being connected to someone that actually worked for an ice company. And, not all ice is the same when you buy it at the gas station or at the supermarket, wherever you pick up your ice. So it's a fun topic to talk about. And thank you for your opinion about that. I've always been kind of curious what someone who was in the industry really thought. All right. So we're getting ready to wrap up. Last question for you is, I like to ask people about books and cookbooks, cookery books, food books. And if you have a favorite that has greatly affected your cooking or your work in the space that you do that you'd like to share, and I'll link it to the show notes. It's a great place for our listeners to discover new books, although some have been repeated because they've had such an impact on so many people. But what would you say to that?
Well, the book where I started, in the early aughts with the renaissance of cocktail making, this book is called "The Fine Art of Mixing Drinks: The Classic Guide to the Cocktail" by David A. Embury. It's from 1948, and it is a step-by-step, cocktail by cocktail. Add this ingredient, the drink becomes that. Take that out, add this ingredient, the drink becomes that. It's just very like 1, 2, 3, and it's it just laid everything out. And it's old enough that it said, and there's a new drink out there called a mojito, and I told you how to pronounce it. But it's really like, this is the starting point for a lot of bartenders to begin to learn professionally about classic cocktails.
Yeah,
and that's where I started when all this started taking over the bar world.
Yeah, wonderful.
And then I have a favorite that's a little more contemporary, kind of from the time when all this did take over the bar world. It's just called The Bar Book, and it's by Jeffrey Morgenthaler, who's a truly incredible bartender, bar educator. And it's just one of those books that does such a good job with the classics, kind of starting with the very basics, but also drilling down into the difference between simple syrup made with this kind of sugar and that kind of sugar, and a rich simple syrup, and kind of getting into
technique.
It gets into technique. And it goes deep, but it's very readable. And if we have a question, this is the first book we'll grab, no question. Right. So just that's like a fabulous resource.
Very good. So I'll link to both of those in the show notes as well. Well, you've given us a lot to think about, a lot of fun ideas. I'm so happy you all were able to come on the show. I know the book is just recently released. I mean, like brand new out. People can order it, get a copy of it now. What's your fall look like in terms of book promotion?
Well, we're doing a lot in the San Francisco Bay Area where we live. So we have a really fun event coming up on November 11th at Omnivore Books, which I'm sure you know in the cookbook world in San Francisco. And then we're having a fabulous launch party up in Sonoma County at a bar called Fern Bar, where we'll be doing sample cocktails, book signings, things like that. And then some other local events as well. So we have a 2-year-old, so we're not traveling too far at this moment. But we have a lot going on.
That's great. Well, it'll be fun to do. And I hope everybody picks up a copy and shares it for holiday gifts or in preparation for their parties and things that are coming up this time of year. What a great time to release your new book, Cocktails with a Twist. So I can't thank you all enough for coming on the show. I wish you nothing but the best. Why don't you tell everybody how they can connect with you online?
Absolutely. And the best way to follow us is through my Instagram. It's Carey_Jones. And I have all the updates on events, media, things like that. John's more old fashioned. He's not the social media guy. So
it's okay. Yeah. Well, that'll be great. Everybody connect with you there. And I wish you all nothing but the best. Enjoy your new cookbook season, and take care, and happy bartending. You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. Again, all the links can be found in the show notes at www.cookbooklove.co. And if you are interested in writing a cookbook of your own, please check out the free cookbook writing masterclass called How to Get Paid to Write a Cookbook. It is designed specifically for food or nutrition experts, and you can check that out at www.cookbookwritersacademy.com/free. So that's it for today's episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. This is your host, Maggie Green. And until next time, have a great day and keep loving your cookbooks.
Thanks for listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast. You can find out more information at www.cookbooklove.co.